So we're here to just share some information, create some awareness. And then as far as specific needs and questions that you may have, that would be for a follow-up. Okay. So just want to tell you a little bit regarding the Heartland and how it got started and maybe how we could potentially help you outside of tonight. The Heartland was founded about over 20 years ago as a nonprofit with the intention of bringing financial literacy classes to the workplace. That's exactly how it started. And as a result, over the last 20 plus years, we've been able to work with some of the biggest companies here in the Chicagoland area, as well as across the country. But even better, in my opinion, is we've been able to work with some of the smaller companies. We've been able to go into brokerage real estate offices and teach financial literacy classes into churches and all different types of organizations. So if this is something that you'd be interested in doing for your organization, please get back to the person who invited you so we can look at seeing if that's a possibility. But tonight, what we're going to be focusing on is the estate planning essentials. And really, it really comes back down to what we teach in this book. If you haven't gotten this book, it's How Money Works. As you can see, this our big banner here in the office. And this book is all about really helping us to accomplish our mission, which is to stamp out financial literacy throughout the U.S. And what the book is really based on is the 7 money milestones, really steps that you need to go through to become financially secure and financially independent. And the 7th step in this process, which is what we're going to cover today, is how to protect your wealth, right? If you think about it, if you do everything right and you build up your wealth, if you don't understand the way the laws are set up, the people you work so hard to build what you have, guess what? You're going to end up losing a lot of that potentially in legal fees, et cetera. And if you don't have a plan, which you'll find out in a little bit, your state will have a plan for you. And I don't think anyone wants their state. I wouldn't want Illinois planning my estate plan, by the way. So anyway, without any further ado, I want to turn this over here to Charles Hughes, which is he's one of the national directors of business development for LSPN Pro. So LSPN Pro is our special guest tonight for the Heartland. And what they are is a national network of attorneys, and they provide advice to pretty much anyone throughout the United States, which is really unique because most firms are just located in a specific state. What I love about them is they have a network like our organization where they can help you pretty much if you're in any other state here in the United States. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn over to Charles. He's joining us via webinar, and I would listen very carefully to him. And throughout the presentation, you may have some questions. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Just keep in mind, we can't answer individual specific questions to your specific needs. You would need an attorney to do that. But if you have any general questions that you might have, please go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. Thank you. Charles, can you hear us?
Perfect. I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Outstanding. So first of all, Anthony, I have to tell you that has got to be the best introduction I've ever had. Honest to gosh, there are times where people are kind of scattered all over, and the direction on that is really helpful. Especially because the fact that there are so many people that will very quickly put into their chat window details that we really don't want to know. Oh my gosh, I'm on that wall all the way in a different state. Gosh, I love technology. Now I feel special. I'm on somebody else's wall. There we go. It's funny. I've been doing this for 15 years, either in this or another company, and yet I still get humbled by the amount of people that are across the country working with clients. The how money works theory in general, it is absolutely one of the most important things that you can have is to have some sort of concept as far as a roadmap, really. And so we're honored with LSPN to be really the exclusive provider of estate planning services to agents across the country. And so that what we'll do today is going to be possibly a little bit different. What I'd like to do is kind of talk a little bit less about the details of each specific trust, because people will say, well, what's better? Is a revocable better than an irrevocable trust, better than this, better than an offshore? And sometimes these details can be overwhelming. And to try to do this in a short period of time, we lose the main gist of things. So what I'd like to do is to talk in general terms of some of the things that can occur. And one of the things that as Anthony had just brought up was the fact that there are a collection of principles that are built out and they are structured in order for us to make sure that we have a very solid financial financial base for our lives. And each different piece for so many people, they're looked at as individual units. And in truth, that book does a great job of saying that you really need to have every aspect addressed. So for example, if I'm having problems with my credit cards and my debt, and I'm trying to get myself out from under debt, perhaps I say, well, maybe I'll hold off on life insurance right now. And then something happens in your life that you wish, gosh, I wish I had had that put together. The opposite direction. I'm trying to get my life insurance in order. And in the meantime, I'm paying thousands and thousands of dollars out into credit. Emergency fund, same thing. The one piece that I find, and I've done this now, I've spent actually 25, 30 years in the credit world, both as a, well, not both, but as a collection agent, for a very short time. So I apologize to anybody I may have called, and I probably haven't called because that was an awful long time ago. But also as a mortgage broker, as well as working with clients to get them out of debt. And so, working with these different arenas, I've also watched this other aspect of the principles with regard to financial planning, and that being estate planning. And over, I find that when they are not being involved and they're not interacting with World Financial and they're not working with your scenario, that last piece gets forgotten. And that can be a really costly aspect of things. We've done everything right. I've got my life insurance in order. I've got my debt out of control. I've got my investments sorted out. And now we've got to the end of life. And I'm sorry, but part of estate planning is talking about that. So if it's uncomfortable, I have to say I'll probably bring that up once or twice during the conversation. But when we get to this point, then we want to transition. We're going to be able to transition on to our next generation. I want to pass this for my wife and myself. It would be, well, my wife first, because I'll probably go before she does, especially because I get in trouble when I don't do the dishes. However, then when we get past that, then obviously passing on to my son and my daughter and perhaps our grandchildren as well. Do we really want to lose 10% of that in that transition process? And that happens again and again and again. We're going to see a number that's going to just really illuminate how much that is. But we look at not having an estate plan put in place, resulting in a 10% slice off the top of anything that you've done during the course of your life. I work hard. Anthony works hard. The individuals that work with Heartland, they work hard for what they do. Do they really want to give up 10% of what they have? And by the way, 10%, we think, well, that's not that bad, right? Our tax brackets are higher than that, so that's not an issue. I'm in Southern California, so my 10%, that's just sales tax almost right now. So we don't worry too much about it. But let's talk about passing on a home from one family generation to another. And when we now start looking at homes in the Northern California area with a median cost of $1 million, we're looking at $100,000 just being taken off the top. I do want to do a little crash course on probate too, because there are some people that don't quite understand that term. When we do pass on everything that we have, our cash, our assets, our homes, our cars, everything is rounded up and put into a container and then held by the state for a period of time. And during that course of time, there's a public notice that goes out and said, this individual has left the earth. And before we pass on the assets to whomever he wants or she wants to pass on to, would anybody like to stake claim to them? Creditors do it all the time. They'll come to say, I'm with Citibank, he owed me $40,000 because I need to get that money now, because if it passes on to the son or daughter or whomever after, then I'll lose my rights to be able to get that after that transition. So I want to get it now. There can be tax boards, of course. There's probate in itself. There are attorney's fees that are involved. There's so many things that are scraping off the top. If we can avoid that from happening by simply having an estate plan in place, boy, wouldn't we like to? And so that's going to be a critical piece to what we do, is establish this so we don't have that done. And again, we'll talk in generalities. We don't necessarily need to talk to details. And the main reason for it is each individual is going to be entirely different. I just got off the phone with a person whose father had just given him the two homes that he lived, as long as he was allowed to stay in the homes for the rest of his life. But at transition time, if the father dies first, that's fine. But if the son dies first and the homes are in the son's name, then we have an issue unless it's put together in a proper fashion. So we want to look at, again, we're going to take a look at the next thing, and that is the fact that estate planning also can avoid so much family conflict that goes on. And if you don't think that there is no conflict at all, my suggestion, my thought is that you've never dealt with death in your life. Unfortunately, I have. By the time you get to 59, 60 years old, people start to pass around you, hopefully around you and not yourself. But I've watched people that have died that have not had estate plans in place. The firm I worked with previously, I was there for 14 years. And in 14 years, we lost 7 individuals, most of them younger, a lot of them without having plans put into place for their children, and a lot of them not having any kind of plan at all, creating havoc with everyone. What money goes where, who gets what. I always wanted this to happen. Dad never wanted this to be done this way. Mom never wanted that. And we're not even talking yet about the cash or the assets itself. And then we're talking about our heirlooms, and heirlooms being if you can hear, I don't know if my microphone picks up, but I have a little bit of a squeak in my desk because it's the desk I grew up with. And when I grew up, my mother and father taught me how to read and write on it. And yet it was close to me, but it was also close to my brother and my other brother and my sister and you get the idea. So everybody wants it unless you have some sort of plan, some sort of roadmap in place. Now, these are really basic things. And how can we get into an argument about the desk? It's not about the desk. It's about the stress. It's about the tragedy. It's about all the things that we're going through. And then that's just the spark. So having the estate plan in place can avoid these family conflicts many, many, many times. So this is going to be something to keep in mind. As we go along, as we get older, we realize more and more this is going to be something that's important. I'm 59, I'm actually going to be 60 next month. But it's constantly in the back of the head thinking, this is something I have to have in place. I have to have it because will my son and my daughter at 31 and 28, and they're older, but will they be ready to take on a mortgage, take on a couple car payments, take on a couple homeowners associations, because in Southern California, we have more homeowners associations than anything. So will we be ready to take on all these things? And unless they get some sort of roadmap, they're going to be in an awful lot of trouble. And by the way, again, we're going back to heirlooms, and we're not even discussing the fact that I've got a garage full of 3 generations worth of things from my family, from my parents, from my parents' parents, and the things that if you accumulated, how do they disperse them? How do they split them up between them? And so not having some sort of thing in place, not having something, we all know that this needs to get done. And if you're sitting in the audience right now, by the way, you should consider yourself grateful or fortunate, because the person that's invited you has not just invited you because they're trying to be involved with you financially. They're inviting you because there's value to this information, and there's value that needs to be passed on to as many people as we can. So when we talk about this and we talk about the ability we have to also look at how many people don't have anything. So, right now we've got 25 people in the room. I can't do 70% of 24. So we'll do 70% of 30. We've got probably 21 of us don't have anything set up. We're sitting there, and there's probably a few of you that are thinking, gosh, you know what? This is me. And I should tell you, if that is you, if that's somebody that if it's something that's concerning you, or if it's something that's concerning you about your mother or father, in my situation, when my mother was left as a survivor and my father had passed away, my brother, my family, we all were worried about this and making sure that we had things in plan, because we wanted to make sure she had a peace of mind. And so this is such a critical thing. And yet all the time we find over and over and over, and this is with the exception of Heartland, is the fact that people don't have conversations with their advisors. Now, I can't talk in detail because we're such a broad range of individuals that we have in the room. But you should know that the benefit to being with Heartland is that they can put you in contact with an attorney, have that one-on-one, have that discussion with us on a one-on-one basis to find out specifically what goes on. But there is an interesting thing about this, and that is that most people that I talk with that have had conversations or otherwise, and it may be yourself, it's been me at one point, which is to think, I don't have an estate. I don't have anything that's big enough that I have to worry about. I have a 1-bedroom apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment, or I have just gotten married and I'm not really that worried about it because we're just getting on our feet, or we just had our first child, but we don't have a massive estate. We don't have a mansion. We don't have grounds. We don't have you know, an area in Northern California where there's a person, he's got 3 white ponies that run around his front yard. I've got a cat, and you know, so I look at it and think, this is not something for me, but I want to emphasize for you that everyone should really give consideration to this, because the estate is not just the property. It's not just the money. It can also be the fact that I've got a child, or I have a spouse that I want to make sure that is going to know what my wishes are in the instant that things come up. So there are such a myriad of different things that come, and yet we all find different reasons why not to talk. I've talked to advisors across the country, and I even asked them, I said, well, why don't you talk to your clients about this? Why don't you have discussions? Most of the time, it's because they don't have enough education in the field. Anthony and his team, they've got the wherewithal to understand that there are certain things they are going to specialize in. They're going to know about insurance. They're going to know everything as far as investment, and all those ends absolutely are going to be the critical pieces. However, the pieces that they don't have emphasis is if you do spend some time and you do read out that book, the last pages of the book talk about asset transfer, but it's not going to be something that is going to be required that they're going to discuss with you. They're going to know to pass that on, and that's how they come over, and they bring people to LSPN. By the way, LSPN Pro, LSPN Direct, I'm sorry not to contradict, but I just realized my screen above my head said LSPN Pro probably, and the one on the screen says LSPN Direct. LSPN Direct is an exclusive relationship that we have only with the World Financial and the Heartland. So we have these things, and so what I'd like to do, and again, rather than go into too much detail for today, I'd rather put some things in your mind to get you past that hump, to get you past the idea of this is not something I have to worry about. And the best way I can do that is just to have a couple questions that I can list out for you. And one of them will probably pertain to you. Maybe, maybe not, but I find that just about everyone in the room will typically find things that are going to hit sweet spots for. And the first one is always asked as to whether or not you have a current plan in place if something happens to you or your spouse. My wife and I, we talked, and by the way, I consider myself frugal. My wife calls me cheap, but I call myself frugal. So as I'm frugal, I think, well, why do I need to have a plan in place? I have my life insurance. I have my investments. I know what I've got going on. Everything is going to be set. So that's what my plan is. My life insurance is my plan, and everything is fine. The current plan is not for right now. The current plan is for the thing that happens next. So if you know someone that in your life that has had a death benefit, unfortunately passed on to them. In my family, we've got a close family friend. She received $1 million check. And we thought, wow, you know, she'll be doing okay. She's 69 years old. She doesn't have an income, and she's not really a viable workforce individual. She spent probably 40 years of her life working with her husband, who's an architect, and doing all the back end, doing the books and such. So as a result, they knew, well, you know, if something happens to him, she's going to lose all revenue. So let's put $1 million into her bank account. Let's make sure that we can go ahead and have a really solid plan here. And that was the plan. After he passed, though, and that money was paid out. And by the way, with life insurance, it's pretty magical because there's no taxes on that. So she's now got $1 million check in a bank account. She thought, well, that number is so big. She's been a concept of that she's never had before. So as a result, it's never going to go away. You know, $1 million will last a lifetime 3 times over. And in reality, in 6 months' time, she's already gone through 20% of it. And how do you go through 20% of $1 million in 6 months? It doesn't take that much because it's an education factor. And so there was no plan in place. And because of no plan, when the son comes home and says, Mom, I'm going to get married, she says, I have $1 million. Let me go ahead and pay for the whole thing. And a $50,000 portion of that $1 million was already paid out. And now we're diminishing quickly. And we think, well, how bad can it be? Now we've got $950 and we're still doing okay. She's still 69. Now she's 69 and a half. So we're going to be okay. But then her husband had architectural designs for the house. She wanted to pay his respect. She wanted to do one last thing for him. So she decided she wanted to have those plans put in place. Now, this is a family that did not have the financial wherewithal to put the plans in place. But now that she's got the cash, now that she has $1 million, and it's never going to go away, she decides, well, I'll write a check for $150,000 and have the house work done to get those plans put in place. Now, the first thing is that the husband's not going to know that because he's gone, unless we have spiritual beliefs that believe that he's down, he's looking down on us and believing that. I'm a Christian. I believe in life thereafter. However, I don't necessarily believe that my wife would be looking down and saying, "I'm so glad you spent 150,000." In fact, if I were down, I'd say probably, "Gosh, why did you do that, honey? Because that's not what we were going to do this with." But needless to say, we're now 20% out of that $1 million nest egg. And it's not going to take much longer for that money to continue to diminish. So we have to have a plan. The second one comes to younger families. Now, and I should tell you that this tends to be an awkward question. I'm going to use words that I may or may not step on someone's toes. And so I'm going to apologize. I'm going to go with just traditional names and labels for people. So when I talk to who would be the legal guardian for your minor children, I'm asking this of somebody, and you may be looking at yourself and say, well, you know what? We just had our first child. Husband and wife, they have the child. Well, I don't have to worry about this. In my situation, again, my frugality came out, and I thought to my wife, and I said, well, why do we need anything? Because if something happens to me, you can make that decision then. Or if something happens to you, I can make that decision then. We don't have to think about that right now. We'll just let it go. That was my justification. By the way, most people, and Anthony hit it right on the head. He said, if you don't have a plan, then you should understand you do have it. The plan is, however, set by the state, not by you. This question, by the way, and while my children are grown, first of all, I'm lucky that we didn't have to contend with it. However, if there is something to happen to both of us and we have minor children, we then have orphans. So what happens next? I have in the back of my head when we were growing up, when our children were growing, I had the back of my head, my youngest brother would be the person that would be that legal guardian. Never had it documented. By the way, if you have children that are minors and you don't have something in place, you should know if you have something in mind, or if you've even talked to this person and said, I want you to be. My brother and I had talked many times about it. Said, yeah, I want you to be the legal guardian. That is not binding in any way, shape, or form. And if something were to happen to both my wife and myself, the state then would take control and say, well, let's take a look at what's around. My brother could even step up, say, you know, I talked to my brother. He said I wanted to be able to be the one to take care of. That's fine. But my brother was probably just getting out of college at the time in which my children were at that age. So the state looks at him and says, you know, you're just getting on your feet. In addition, he's disabled, probably more enabled than most of us, but he's disabled. And so as a result, the state would probably look at him very quickly and pass him up. I've got a sister who has got a wonderful son and a husband and wife, and everything is going great. Not an except, but there is an except. They homeschool their children. Now, do I have a problem with homeschooling? Absolutely not. The state looks at things like that, though, and they make judgments. And they say, well, you know what? We can't put them. Then we look around the rest of my family. I've got an alcoholic brother at the time, and so unfortunately, he's recovering and doing a phenomenal job for years. But that's not going to be working. And then finally, there's that last person in my family. It's my oldest brother. I love him to death. We backpack together. We've ridden bicycles around Lake Tahoe in Northern California. We've done all kinds of activities. But there is one thing I don't care for, and that's the way he parents his children. And yet he's married and he has a great job and he has a house and he has income coming in. He's got savings. He's got 2 children. Perfect scenario. But as I said, I would never want to have him raise my children. But the fact is, Anthony hit it, as I said before, right on the head. There is a plan there that is set up. And in the event that I don't make decisions ahead of time, someone's going to do them for me. And that is the state. So it's going to be a key thing to remember. Then we take a look at this. And you know, I point a lot of times with this question, who makes medical or financial decisions if you're enabled? I look from a younger standpoint, and we have to look at COVID, regardless of what your beliefs or statuses is. There were people that died. There were people that went on life support. In fact, we have an agent from Heartland that lives in Southern California. I've known him for quite some time. I didn't know he went into a coma for 2 months during the beginning of COVID. And each week they would come back to the wife and say, well, we're not seeing him come. We're not seeing progress. We're not seeing anything happen. Should we stop life support? And this question came again and again and again. And for the fortunate grace that the wife said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to continue. He was able to be maintained. But if he not had a spouse, even his own parents would not be able to make that decision because parents can't make a decision for a person that's over 18. They don't even have the ability to talk about them. So who makes that financial decision? Again, you don't have choices. If you haven't made a plan, the plan is there for you. And this is, and I bring up COVID as, let's scratch that for a second and take a look at a different way. I personally have epilepsy. I've had some pretty bad seizures over the course of the years. Most of the time it's controlled. I've never had anything with the exception of one time where it went really bad. And I was taken out of the house, brought to the hospital. My wife sat by my side, or at least I think she did. They told me she did. She sat by my side and she just figured one day, 1 minute, I was going to open my eyes and everything would be fine. Until the doctor came in and said, do you have any kind of medical directive, an advanced directive in place for your husband? And then the world got different. The world got serious. Because now, from the time in which they asked that question until the time I opened my eyes again, she had to go through her mind thinking, what am I going to do next? I know what he would have wanted. I know where he wants to be. But how do I put that decision onto her when, for the rest of her life, she's going to have to question herself. Did I make the right decision? If I have documentation in place ahead of time, then that doesn't happen because I've made those choices. The same thing with financial decisions as well. And those are documents that come into estate plans. Most people think, well, I need an estate plan, and all they're thinking is a trust or a will, but it's a combination of things. The next thing we would look at is whether or not you have a plan in place for your home or your event of illness. This sounds a little bit like the previous one, but it's a little bit different too. I had a next door neighbor. She died at 99 years old and she passed away in her home, in her bed. I spent 25 years visiting her because I call her my next door neighbor, but I hadn't been there for 30 years because I had moved out of the area, but I would visit all the time. And she always had a collection of different things she would reminisce about, but her conversations would always go back to, I've done everything I want. I've seen, I've spent my time with my husband and myself, and my husband has passed away years ago. I've done the things I've wanted to do. All I want to do now is just be able to live out the rest of my life in my house. And yet her daughter tried to take her out of her home because she couldn't take care of things. And frankly, it wasn't because it was such a nice thing to do. It was because the home was worth $1.5 million and the daughter wanted to put the house on the market. And fortunately, somebody got wind of it. And rather than having any arguments or any kind of challenges at all, because there was an estate plan put in place, and in that estate plan, it provided for the instance of, I can't take care of myself anymore. And she was able to be cared for by medical staff inside her home until the day she died. These are the things that we bring to clients. These are the things that we do when we work with clients. Again, not talking about details. It's like, well, I haven't talked about a will or a trust yet. Let's go on a little bit further. What happens to our businesses? A hobby of mine is I bake bread. And my son keeps telling me I should open up a bakery, and I keep saying, well, that's fine as long as they can figure out how to pay me as much. But I will say that if I were a great baker and my wife or my business partner were a great marketer and said, you know what, I can market and sell your bread all day long, and I could bake that bread all day long, and something happens to me, well, my partner now is out of a job, or something happens to him and I'm out of a job. So we have a thing called key man insurance. So in the event that something happens to me, my partner is taken care of. If something happens to him or her, I am taken care of either way. We put that policy into a trust. It has to be there. It has to be built into that estate plan. Again, it's services that we provide. Now, these are a collection of things. All the questions point to one thing, which is going to be our website. And our agents would normally go, and if you're an agent right now, I'd say this is what to do, is go to LSPN Direct. Most of you know. However, I want to have you all know the process in which that estate planning goes, and also the fact that there are some considerations when it comes to estate planning. One of the things I mentioned before is I again call myself frugal. My wife calls me cheap. But I will tell you, I've hesitated and dragged my feet for so long because I don't want to pay $3,000 or $4,000 for a trust. And that's not an uncommon dollar figure. LSPN, because we transition this, because we bring this thing through Through Heartland, because we bring it through World Financial, this is something that we have the ability to do at a drastically reduced price. But the process is going to be really simple. We're going to talk about this. This would be if I were talking to an agent. So let's talk about the process itself. If you were brought to me and somebody said, well, could you talk to my client? Can you talk to this individual? The first thing we do with our clients is we have a 30-minute consultation. The consultation is free. There is absolutely no obligation. There is no stress involved. We have a conversation that goes two ways. One of which is, who are you and what's going on with yourself financially, and tell me what your dreams and your desires are as far as your home and your assets. And secondly, this is what estate planning is. This is the type of trust that we have. This is likely to be what you would want to look at. And that would be what we would do in that first consultation. If you decide at the point in time that you say, you know what, this is for me, I need something put in place, then by all means, you have the opportunity to move forward. If you choose not to, that's fine as well. Also in our program, what we do is we just develop a design meeting. And design meeting is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to sit down now and we'll spend a little time about finding out the details. Where are your assets? Do you have life insurance? Do you have a home? Do you have titled assets? Do you only have everything piled underneath the bed? All these things would be discussed in this design meeting. And when everything was determined as far as who's going to care for me in the event that something needs to be made a decision as far as finance, who's going to make decisions for me if I can't take care of myself medically, who am I going to make sure distributes and helps the distribution of my assets? And so I've got to go through all these aspects when I go through this design meeting. And then finally, when we're done with that design meeting, we create a draft of what you're going to have. That draft shows everything, all the desires, all the needs, give this much to that person, give this much to that person, so on and so forth. When everything is all finished with this, we draft those documents, we give it to the client for review. And then after that, we send out a notary to your doorstep. So there's no need for you to really leave your home for this. I will tell you, most of the people that I've known in the estate planning process, including the people that have put together my trust for myself, for my wife, for my wife's father, for my mother, for my brother, we've all been attorneys and we've all had to go to their place. We've all sat, by the way, in really comfortable chairs and probably behind a lot of mahogany desks and probably spent much, much more than we would have had to because we've gone through this process. They'd also provide a notary, but again, we'd have to come to them. In this instance, we believe that we can go ahead and bring our services directly to you. That notary is taken care of, and once that's done, the last thing we would do is that you need to make sure that your deed to your home is transferred. We move that from you and we put this into the trust. By the way, when we talk about probate, if you have money, if you have your home inside in a living trust, when I pass away, the reason it's called a living trust is because it's living. It continues to live after I pass. So it avoids the probate process. It avoids the concerns that we might have possibly had in that, and it takes care of this. But this does need to be done, and the deeds need to be filed at the county recorder's office. These are the ones that are being changed that are currently in our name. And then in the future, there are other assets that you can also have transferred into the trust. Now, you don't have to name them necessarily, but you can have those deeds documents done. So what do I talk about? I buy a new home, I buy a new car, I buy an RV, something that has title attached. Those are the things that we're going to go ahead and move forward. And we take care of that, and that is the full thing. Some clients get their process done. So the people that we work with in 2 or 3 weeks. I have a client that's very, very ill right now, and his life expectancy is being counted in days. Nothing has been established, nothing was created, and so we're moving this through as fast as we possibly can. There are other people that say, well, you know what, I'll talk about it today, and then we'll push it out a week, a month, a year, and you have that prerogative to do so, and we're never going to push you, but we'll always be there for you. So that's the process. That's all handled by going to our website. And if you're a guest, this is not where you want to go. If you're a guest in this meeting today, what you're going to want to do is you're going to turn to the person that invited you and say, can you help me set this up? And they'll coordinate the appointment scheduling, and we'll take care of all of that, and we'll put this all into the proper fashion. But really, that's not going to be something you'd have to worry about. We're going to skip past this for a second. We want to talk about the anatomy of estate for an estate for a second. And I want to just have you realize the power of things. First of all, when we have an estate created, an estate plan, and a living trust in particular, the grantor is the person that is normally the client. It can be a husband and wife, it can be a family, it can be multiple people, it can be business partners, but the grantor, that can be an individual or it can be multiple individuals, but what they do is they decide the terms of this trust. By the way, when we're done explaining this, I'm going to show you how critical this can be put up in certain instances. So the grantor is going to be the person that is going to make all the decisions as far as what goes where and when. Most of us, we think, okay, we have a beneficiary, it's 3 children. So there's our 3 children. That's going to be an equal distribution. However, we can say, you know, in my family's case, my youngest brother was disabled. So the trust was set up like this. And then the youngest child, he was disabled. So my mother said, we want to make sure he's taken care of before anything. So let's take half of the trust. Let's take half of the estate, everything, the home, the life insurance, everything. Let's take half of it and we'll give it to my youngest brother. And then the other children in the house, in our instance, we had 5, so we would have 2 more characters here. Those people would then split the rest, and that would be fine. I've had situations where we've had estranged children. It's not uncommon to say, well, I'll give like $1,000 to the one estranged child and we'll do equally for the rest. And you say, well, why would I give $1,000 if the child's estranged? Because if you do that, you avoid any kind of contestation. You simply say, I'm going to write you a check for $1,000 out of the trust. If you contest it, and if you find yourself at fault and you don't win, then you don't get anything. So most of the time, that is the best way to go ahead and avoid, rather than saying that classic, I'll cut you out of my win. So that's the grantor. The grantor sets up the rules, the regulations. The beneficiaries are just that. They're the ones that are going to receive the assets in the event of. And then there's the trustee. And the trustee can be a number of different things. It can be an individual. It can be a brother, a sister, a friend. It can be a beneficiary. In my instance, with my family, my oldest brother was financially pretty set, as I said. So as a result, when my mother passed, he was the trustee, but he was also a beneficiary, and that's never a problem. But this is all established like this. The manager is bound by the trust. He has to follow those guidelines. He has no choice. He has to go through. When we talk about revocable and irrevocable trusts, while there is a choice at the very beginning to say, I want this versus that, depending on your scenario, in the instance here, most people with family trust have a revocable trust because things need to change. I've got a new home. I want to be able to put it in. I've sold my car. I want to take it out. I've got a new child that was born. I've got an older child that just doesn't behave. And so I can't feel like I'm comfortable passing anything on to him. All those things get modified, but that's a living trust. The moment the individual, the grantor, passes away, then the trust becomes irrevocable. So there's no choice either way. The trustee has to follow the guidelines. They take care of the distribution. So looking at this, I'd like to give you one scenario and why it was so critical. And if you could just kind of like close your eyes and pretend nothing is here, with the exception of one son. And I can't do this because it's not my PowerPoint, or I don't have the ability to annotate. But we have one child and we have a mother, and that was all we had. And the child was 27 years old at the time. And unfortunately, he had gone through years and years of addiction. He had heroin addiction that just wouldn't stop. He got on his feet several times. He went back into rehab clinics. He had spent through any money that was ever given to him. He had been in jail, been in the hospital, been back at home, been homeless. And so there's all variety of different things that have happened to this family. And over the course of time, if you've ever had experience with alcoholism or drug addiction in your family, you'll know that wears up. So they eventually got to a point where the grantor, which was not the grantor at the time, it was just a mother, said, you know, if something happens to me, and by the way, this is a phrase that you'll hear over and over and over in the insurance industry, and I've used it myself, is if something happens to me, I want to make sure that my family is taken care of. That phrase is used again and again and again And that's what she brought to the table when she talked to an insurance agent. I should say, had nothing to do with your team or your firm for that matter. So she decided, well, if something happens to me, I want to make sure that I've got a life insurance policy in place, gets a $500,000 policy, and says, now we're set. And about a year later, she passed away. And when she passed away, for those of you that don't know how life insurance works, there's just the need to show a death benefit check. Death certificate. The death certificate is proven. And then once that's done, that death benefit is passed on to the beneficiary being the son. So a $500,000 was instantly handed to this child. And at 27, he's been given a $500,000. He's out of control with heroin. And within a year and a half, he was gone. By the way, most of the people I talk to, if I have it and we're having a face-to-face, I ask the question, most people say, oh, well, he just been through that. When you have a $500,000 and you have that kind of a drug problem, you don't have time to spend through it because you're just going to have so much go into your system that it kills you. Now, this conversation came to me from my daughter. She's a social worker. She works with drug addicts. She works with alcoholics. This was one of her clients that I'm discussing. She had been so upset at the mother because the mother said, I want to take care of my family. And the only thing that happened was this policy, which is basically, it was a bullet in the gun. And she really completely defeated her purpose. Taking the anatomy of the estate, taking what we're looking at right here and putting this in the same scenario. If we put that life insurance policy and pointed it to the trust, the beneficiary was the trust, not him. Then what we can do with that trust is we can say he can receive money for legal bills. He can get it for medical, for rehab, for rent, and any number of different things. But there can't be any cash that ever gets distributed directly to him. And that could be established in the way in which we're looking right here. We can even pass additional assets to other family members, but that could have potentially changed the world for these people. And that's the power of what we have with the estate plan. That's what we need. And that's why we look at what we do. There's a couple things that people need to be aware of as far as a trust. Trust absolutely needs to be structured properly. There are a lot of online services. Again, go back to frugal. I was frugal when I decided I wanted to use, well, I was going to give you the brand, but I'm not going to talk. There's a collection of different softwares for taxes. I, for 10 years, said, I'll do my own taxes. It only cost me $25 for the software. It'll be fine. I don't need to do this. My wife told me over and over, we should just have them done. And then after about 10 years, I was audited and it cost me about $25,000 in my audit. So what I'm trying to go with this is that when you're trying to set up a trust, don't go cheap. Don't try to get something and just go online and get this done because you're not going to do it right. So you have to work with a professional. Work with Heartland, work with WFG, work with us. Give us an opportunity to work with you and make sure that everything is done and taken care of. The other thing is it needs to be funded properly. What funding means is it's not about being paid. It means about the assets that are going to be added to that trust. So any asset that has a title to it, car, a house, or an RV, those are the things that we have to put in. If I've got a closet full of Pokemon cards, that's a whole different story. That's what a will is for. Because a will will take everything that I have and we'll bundle it together and we'll put that inside the trust for me at the time in which that we need it. It does need to be executed properly. Again, big mistake people do is they buy these $20, $30 softwares, $100 softwares. Will creating software. And then what happens is they get it all put together. It's not signed. It's not notarized. Goes right back to Anthony's comment. If you don't have a plan, there's one there for you. And even if you've done all the work and if you have a plan, if you haven't signed it, haven't notarized it, it doesn't count. So those are the things that a trust needs. The things it doesn't need is number one is it doesn't need to be recorded with the state. There's a lot of confusion about that. You have to record the deeds, but you don't have to take the trust and record that with the state, not required. It also does not need to list the property inside the document. In other words, it doesn't have to have my home address of my home listed inside there. But the title asset, the title assets do, but regular assets don't. I don't have to go wandering around my house and saying, well, there's Pokemon cards in the drawer. There's a bunch of, well, I guess I'm kind of disclosing who I am because there's comics down here. There's yeah. So you get the idea. I'm not going to take that. The only things we need to worry about are titled assets, and we need to have those added inside the trust. And the final thing that is it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, you're working with a company right now. If you're sitting as a guest, you're either a client right now, or you could possibly be a client, or possibly somewhere time in the future, whether or not you do or not. One thing to keep in mind is, you know, this firm has more than 70,000 individuals that are affiliated with it across the country. When you have 70,000 agents that are tied to us, I promise you the services that we bring to the table are significantly less expensive than what you would. And by the way, I didn't say significantly cheaper. I said less expensive than if you were to try to do this, or if you were going to try to get this done by someone else. So bring this out, understand if you have a need, if you have a desire, come to us, have a conversation with us, have us have that discussion, have that 30-minute discussion, and that should get you off and get you going. Anthony, I think that at this point, I want to open up, see if we have any kind of questions that I can answer. I'm going to hit a stop share for a second. There are, as I said, some details that we can go over as far as the website and such, but that's going to be more appropriate for. But if we can just go ahead and answer any kind of question. And then moreover, the one thing I do want to emphasize, I've already said it a few times, is if you've been invited to come to see what we have here, you're cared for by at least one person. There is someone there that cares enough that they want to make sure that you have the opportunity to learn. I've watched people that have, gosh, they could have been so successful, but they just squandered money because they had no friends or they had no education. And frankly, it's the way the country is. We just don't educate our people. So I would like to ask if anybody, what are my thoughts on real estate investors needing an estate plan? Unequivocally, positively, you have to. No questions asked, without a doubt, for a variety of reasons. If we're talking about investors themselves, that's one, because there's a transfer of asset at the time in which we have that transfer. There's a collection of things that can go right or wrong. My other feeling with regard to this, I'll talk to you about. And you know, Anthony, I've got story after story. When I first started working, I had my own experiential items that I could bring on, but I was handed 35 pages of different discussions of things that have happened, different case studies. There was an elderly woman. She was in her 80s. She had a duplex. The duplex rent, the second unit, covered the cost of everything for her and her husband, and she had worked through their entire life to be able to get this. They had the duplex. She lived in one unit. She had the other. Now, this is not necessarily a real estate investment. She was a renter. She rented. She was a landlord, so she rented one unit. She lived in the other. And she held the home in her own name, and then was in a fender bender. And after she was in the fender bender, really easy to pull title and just to say, who owns this house? And found that this individual owned this house. And so she must be a millionaire because she's in Los Angeles and the home is worth $2 million. She's not worth $2 million. She's just got the house. But because it was a commercial property, because she has a renter, it was exposed. And because it was exposed, she ended up losing everything. She lost it in a lawsuit. She lost the home. She ended up basically living with her parents or living with her children until the time which she died. So yes, without a doubt, if you're looking at investing and doing work like that, with no questions asked, you have to have it held at least an arm length away.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions here in the audience or online? You can go ahead and just chat your question. Okay. I'd like, I want to just share. Well, looks like we have a question here.
We got it says a deceased parent with two heirs, daughter and a niece, lived with a deceased person in life. No will trust. Is niece entitled to the assets? If there was nothing there, let me see, a deceased, boy, this is almost like a word puzzle. Two heirs, a niece and a daughter. Oh, live with the deceased person. No, that in my eyes, I would look at that, and that would indicate that likely is that the assets would pass to the direct descendant. So in other words, if I've got a child, and a child has a child as well, or whatever that blood is, as long as I have blood connected to the daughter, that's who's going to receive those assets. It doesn't matter whether or not that other individual was there. So yeah, that's in fact, there's a discussion a story I heard years ago, which was just heartbreaking, was that there were two women, they were gay, never told the family. Everybody thought that they were just best of friends. And for their entire lives, everybody just thought, well, they're nice, they live together and they're best friends and they bought a house together and how nice and this and that. And then at the end, when the one woman passed away, the family came and said, well, I'm so glad you were such a nice friend to mom, but we are going to take the house and we're going to sell it. And it's like, but wait, that's not what we were doing. But because there was no trust in place and because it was blood ties, the blood tie overrode the fact that these two people had a relationship for 30 years. So yes, absolutely. If you've got a direct blood tie and there's nothing else indicating as far as a will or trust, no questions asked. You are open up to a will. However, I'm sorry, you're opened up to lawsuits, which then get really ugly. So yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
So I know.
Can you hear the question? Go ahead.
We didn't talk about pricing, but when you're planning, is it planning for your husband and yourself? Is that all one plan? Or is it just, is it for a couple or is it?
Yeah, so
You're
maybe,
talking about, okay, so I think what you basically said is, do I have a trust that is just one person, one trust, one person, one trust? No, you can actually have a family trust. If that was that the question, Angel?
yes,
Anthony?
that was the question. And can you maybe show that one pager, what's included? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we have a page. As a matter of fact, let's go here. And there is, oops, I forget. I guess maybe it would help if I share too, huh? Okay, so we've got this is our basic program, which we handle. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna break this into two pieces. I'm gonna move this out because we're just in the process of changing a platform a little bit. So I moved two pieces, so we have two items here. On the left-hand side, and this is for about 70% to 80%. I watch this number every month. It flips up and down by about 10%, but it's about 70 to 80% of our clientele fall into the category of what we're looking at here. Now I know it's like, well, why do you have all these things? So let me explain. The left-hand side is going to show a package program that LSP had put in. And the main reason we did this was because we thought, you know what? Estate plans cost $3,000. And there's so many people that are walking around because they just can't afford this. And so what we originally started with LSPN was, well, let's try to make this as bare bones financially as we can. We can still keep it as robust as we need it, but let's just strip it down to the bare bones of what it is. We talked at the very beginning about a living trust. The living trust avoids probate. It takes people and bypasses that probate process. It also simplifies things because if I've got multiple life insurance policies, I can have one beneficiary always, which is the trust. And then I can have the trust route where everything goes. So if I have a new addition or change to my policies, I don't have to change 5 policies. I just change the beneficiary that would be inside the trust. So that's going to be the revocable living trust. The next would be a last will and testament. So, well, why would I need a will if I have a trust? Because of all the other things scattered that we talked about before, the collection in the closet of the Pokemon cards and the comics and the cash and things that we didn't talk about. If I pass away, there's a thing called a pour over will that grabs all of those assets that are not listed and it puts them in at the last moment. I'm going to stop at last will and testament for a second as well, because there's something to keep in mind. It's like a lot of people say, well, I have a will. Why do I need a trust? If we have the will, we have an executor of the will. That's going to be somebody that can execute and make sure everything gets taken care of, but it stops there. If we go back and we talk about that man that had the drug addiction issue, the will doesn't fix that problem. We need to have somebody that's going to oversee and manage. So that's what one of the reasons is. Another reason that there's a problem with a will is it's much, much more subject to contestation. In other words, people can challenge it a lot more effectively than they can on a trust. The more important reason for me is I'm a personally, I consider my finances fairly personal. I don't want to have people seeing them. And the will is a public document. So when I pass away, the will is posted. If you go and search a little bit, if you know Anna Nicole Smith, if you've got a little bit of years on you, some of the younger people may not, you'll find everything that she had and everything that was passed on. So do you really want to have that opened up now? And you say, well, I don't care one way or the other. How about this? I'm not a wealthy man, but I do have a home that's worth a decent amount of money, not because I bought $1 million home, but because I just bought a home at a very good time. And so as a result, I don't want I don't want the world knowing that there's suddenly this big influx of cash and assets into my daughter's life. And I'm sorry, I'm not being sexist as a daughter and a son, but do I want to have everyone in California or the country know that this amount of money has been passed into my daughter's hands? Because frankly, there's a lot of people out there that are not so nice, and they will take advantage of that. And they do it on a regular basis. They'll come in, they'll try to sell investments and everything else. All of a sudden you've got, it's just ugly. When we talked about the other, which is financial power of attorney, the healthcare documents, those are the things we discussed as far as who makes decisions on what and where, those are built into the program as well. Our mobile or virtual notary, it all depends on what works. In New York, for example, you can't use virtual notaries. And then our funding assistance includes one property transfer. So we're not going to do 2 cars, we'll do 1 car, 1 house, and we'll take care of the documentation on that. We also show you what to do as far as new purchases. Go buy a new house, this is how to list it, so you don't have to do that multiple times. So this is a bundled package, and what we used to do was we bring this to the table at $1,000. And we thought, well, there's still clients that are saying, well, $1,000 is rough. I don't know if I can bring that much cash to the table. But most people can afford $50 a month. So we said, well, but 50 a month ends up a little bit higher. Because if we say 50 a month, now it's 1,200 instead of 1,000. But rather than it being interest charges and such, if you look on the right side, I'm going to now open this up, because the right-hand side, now it's now in the center, is going to be the assisted trust. Those are all the items that we just talked about. But then we packaged it with a collection of other things. There's an annual review. That gets done, and we can do any kind of minor updates with no charges at all. There are services. So if you're looking for an attorney and you're looking for a reference, we can help you with that. We've got legacy videos. It's like, well, what's a legacy video? I can record up to 2 hours worth of time per year to ask questions and to interview someone and to say, this is what I did as a child. This is what was important to me. These are the things I did in high school. And these are the things, and you can ask those questions, they index them. It gives you an opportunity to look at them. So all of these are built in. There's a concierge service. So if you're looking for resources when something happens and when someone passes, there's a secured vault. Now, $997 was the original standalone, but what we did was we bundled it further. We said $50 per month for 2 years. That's a total of $1,200. And that's the program that we now offer. We do not now normally offer that $997. If someone says, well, I really don't want to have all those other services, you have the right to just tell me that, and you can write a second check and just take care of the total at $997. But it is typically going to be brought to the table at $50 per month for 2 years. So is Anthony, was that the one that we were looking for? Is that the document you were looking for?
Yeah. Yes. Thanks for clarifying. And then we got a couple more questions, and then we can wrap it up here if you don't mind answering them in the chat.
Perfect. Absolutely. So the second one, oops, let's see, maximize that. So I've got, and let me stop sharing. I just realized, kind of out of control here.
Clarify
We'll
that
do
plan
this.
then it's for the couple.
Yeah, so it's a couple. Yeah, so if you're a husband and wife,
Oh, yeah.
that's what you would pay to get this plan set up, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So that way, and now there are different scenarios, mind you. The quickest and fastest one to bring to mind would be if I had a special needs child. I've got my oldest brother's got an autistic child. Autism is a challenging thing in itself. The more difficult thing is the fact that when the state gets involved and starts making decisions, you ask yourself, do you want the state making choices for your child who can't fend for themselves if you're not there? And in that instance, boy, you're going to definitely want to have a choice. More importantly is that you've got scenarios where, and this is a statistic. If you have a child that's autistic and you've got a loving family, fantastic. But there is a statistic that shows that normally one parent typically gravitates toward the child. The other parent typically gravitates toward the door. They can't deal with the stress and the everything. And so they normally leave. And it's a harsh reality. But I'll tell you, I've got a good friend whose the father of her son, I know him. They did exactly that. He walked away. Didn't take a lot of responsibility. He comes into his life maybe once every 2 months and says, I want to take my son out. And the last time that I had heard that something had gone on like this was at Christmas. And he lost this boy for 6 hours in the shopping center. And he's got advanced autism. So I had a conversation with her and said, are you comfortable with having your father the father being the guardian? And so that's where we started looking at it. So yeah, what we looked at cost wise would be the base. 70-80% of our clients, we have some other people that are going to also have something that would be more complex. So Fabiola said, thank you for all the information. Thanks. How many times are you allowed to revise trust? As many times as you want. You have to pay for it. If you have that maintenance program that we talked about with the 50 per month, then you can make minor changes every year. And all you need to do is reach out to us and let us know you've got to have the changes done. So that makes it that $50 per year for the $200 extra. I'd say absolutely do that, because otherwise it's going to cost you about $150 for every change that you do. Sorry, I missed your answer. If two people live in a house together and they both own the property, do they still need a trust, or will the entire property go to the living person? You can go either way with that, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to make a lot more sense if you've got it in a trust. There's a thing called a stepped up basis, and I'm not going to get into tax law at all right now, or property law, but I will tell you that my wife and we bought our house at $180,000. It's a lot more than that now. And I look at my neighbors and I think, wow, you got a Mercedes-Benz right next to me, and you were so silly because you bought that house for way more than I did. That's okay. But I look at that, and if I were to pass away, what happens is that the value of my home is stepped up to what the value is today. Okay, so there's no tax ramification. So that stepped up basis, that can be used and can be utilized in a trust as well as just for the spouse. So that would be something that you're really going to be better off to have that put into place in the event. I will tell you something else, and Arthur, this is my feelings, and this is just unfortunately because the way the world is right now, is that there was always a justification in my mind. If something happens to me, you do it. If something, we just talked about that at the beginning. In reality, there are too many times nowadays that I'm seeing that there's two people that are lost at the same time. Whether or not it's because of violence, or whether or not it's because husband and wife in the beginning of January, there's a husband and wife down in Brazil swimming in the beach with the son, and the son starts to drown. Mom and dad jump in the water to go get them, both gone. And now you've got a 13-year-old son sitting on the beach as an orphan. Yeah, you could have given it to your wife. Don't worry about it. You've got two people that own the house. No way. The thing about a trust is it doesn't die, and and so you're really, would you carry $100,000 in your pocket and you say, well, it'd be okay because it's inside my pocket? No, if I put it inside a safe, it's going to be a lot more secure. That's exactly what a trust is.
Awesome. Charles, thank you so much for your time this evening. This has been very informative, a lot of value. And it's part of our book and our mission, again, to educate people. I know that we're looking to have more of these classes. We'll continue to cover different money milestones. We're looking at the cash flow milestone for this next class. I'm sure we'll be talking about investments and retirement. So stay tuned. If you're a guest tonight, it's not what you do. It's not about what you learn. It's about what you do with what you learn, right? That's why there's always a new diet book that comes out, right? It comes out as a new way to do a diet, but it just, again, we keep reading the same book. If we don't take any action on it, at the end of the day, it doesn't help us. So it's important that if this is important to you, it's important that you make it a priority for yourself, whether it's us that helps you or somebody else, that's up to you. We would love that opportunity to see if we can help you. And, I've helped quite a few clients myself with the LSPN, and I've been working in financial services for 25 years. And we've never had a company that's been this good to our clients and provided so much value that they'll meet with you and give you 30 minutes of their time. Most attorneys will not give you 30 minutes of their time and provide you, some guidance. So I think it's worth the time to do it for you. Just get back to the person who invited you and we'll help you out. Thanks again, Charles. Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.